Ruby Franke believed that her righteous parenting was responsible for their salvation forever. Can you imagine carrying that weight? Another core concept in Mormon teachings is that obedience equals love. Hi, I'm Lynn Smith Gregory, and welcome back to the channel, Heretic Survivor from Mormon to Me. Today I'd like to discuss something a little heavy, and I promise we'll treat the subject with thoughtfulness and compassion. I suspect you've heard of Ruby Franke, the Mormon mom influencer who was arrested on child abuse charges. There's a documentary out now called The Devil in the Family, and I found it very difficult to watch and very triggering. I want to be very clear from the start. This isn't about demonizing the Mormon church or religion in general, but instead to discuss how religious concepts, when taken to this extreme, can veer into extreme behavior and even child abuse. Let's unpack this together. Is there a connection between religious beliefs and extreme parenting? When I was a Mormon, one of the things I liked was the idea of a family forever, an eternal family in the afterlife. But this can be twisted, even though it sounds perfect. Imagine the pressure on parents to make sure their children make it to heaven as part of the family. That's their responsibility to raise them right so that this doesn't happen. And most of the time, this translates into parental guidance and instruction that's fine. But sometimes it can get twisted into something much darker, which is what happened with the Ruby Franke situation. In her videos, Ruby Franke would often justify her behavior by saying it was spiritual preparation or that she was raising righteous children. She literally believed that she was saving her children and responsible for their eternal salvation. And that can be a very heavy burden and sometimes lead to justifying extreme measures. Ruby Franke believed that her righteous parenting was responsible for their salvation forever. Can you imagine carrying that weight? Another core concept in Mormon teachings is that obedience equals love. And this usually refers to a loving relationship with God. But Ruby Franke flipped this into something more toxic and believed that her children needed to be perfectly obedient in order for her to love them. We saw this play out in her videos and in the documentary, The Devil in the Family, where Franke withheld affection, love, even basic requirements that children need until her kids complied completely. It was about control. Think about what this teaches a child, that they're only loved when they're perfectly behaved. And that's not unconditional love. That is the opposite. It's conditional approval. I know I personally felt this, as I've shared before. My father was a scary guy when he got angry, when we disobeyed or we did something wrong or we messed up, we just made a mistake. And I knew he was carrying the weight of our eternal salvation as his responsibility. And I believe he overreacted with way too extreme punishments for messing up. We were not just spanked, but whipped, something that I can't imagine parents today would be comfortable with. Mormon scripture talks about the natural man. It's about overcoming our natural tendencies to sin by trying to improve and be perfect. But in Ruby Franke's hands, it became something else. Natural childhood tendencies such as curiosity, independence, even having emotions were treated as negative things that needed to be eliminated or broken. You remember what it was like being a kid, running around, goofing off, asking why a million times, having a meltdown over something that didn't seem important to adults. But Franke felt like these were rebellious tendencies that needed to be stamped out, not normal childhood activities or development. The Mormon Church has a concept of worthiness, which in and of itself isn't harmful, that you have to be worthy to participate in certain religious activities, such as entering the temple. Franke interpreted this worthiness concept to mean that her children needed to earn basic human dignity, love, food, comfort. These weren't rights but privileges to be earned through complete obedience. And then there's the Mormon Mommy Culture, where social media presents these perfect Mormon moms and their families. And the Mormon Church has encouraged this. They believe that these glowing testimonials reflect positively on the church. And in fact, they have a motto, every member a missionary. So this attracts newcomers to the church. But when your family becomes your brand, there's even more incentive to control the product, which is, in this case, means controlling your children at any cost, especially when she became the primary breadwinner with her 8-passenger blog. Ruby started positioning herself as someone who had been chosen to deliver a divine message in these last days, especially after she connected with Jodi Hildebrandt. Mormonism, as you know, is founded on Joseph Smith's claims to be chosen to restore the true gospel to the earth. And Ruby seems to have appropriated this story in her own case, that she was divinely chosen to deliver this message. Both the church and Ruby believe we are in the last days before the second coming of Christ. Ruby seemed to appropriate this, believing that she had divine insight into her children's spiritual states. And here's the danger. When someone feels like they're on a divine mission, almost anything doesn't feel too extreme. Even normal childhood rebellion was now seen as something incredibly sinful and from Satan. When someone believes they're on a divine mission, it's easy to justify almost anything. Children's infractions suddenly require extreme measures to correct because they're seen as spiritual corruption. I think what concerns me most is that in high control, high demand religions, authority is prized over personal discernment. And we saw this with Ruby Franke's husband, who was in denial about what was happening in his family and to his wife, because they're used to listening to authority to tell them what is and isn't true, rather than rely on their own sense of reality. This emphasis on external authority can impair critical thinking skills. Ruby seemed to be unable to critically evaluate her parenting techniques and instead deferred to Hildebrandt's authority because she'd been trained to do this. And this brings me to an important question. Was Ruby Franke vulnerable to Jodi Hildebrandt's cult of connection because of her religious background? Research suggests that people raised in authoritarian religions can transfer this to other cult-like settings. 1, they're used to deferring to outside authority figures. They often think in black and white terms. And 3, they believe that external forces control what happens in life. So where does that leave us? First, I want to emphasize that the Ruby Franke story is not typical of most Mormon parents and families. The connection between her Mormon upbringing and her abusive parenting is not one of causation, but one of misinterpretation and escalation. Core religious beliefs about family, morality, and obedience were twisted into something unrecognizable after Ruby Franke became involved with Jodi Hildebrandt. I think the documentary serves as a reminder that we all need to examine our beliefs critically, and that no divine instruction or mission or belief justifies harming a child. Love shouldn't be conditional. Children shouldn't have to earn attention, care, protection. Thanks so much for joining me. I know this was difficult. It was difficult for me to get through. It made me think a lot of my own childhood and those of my Mormon friends, where there was what we would consider now abusive parenting techniques. Thanks for joining me. If you found this video helpful, please share it with others, like this video, and join my channel below. I'd love to hear your comments and what your thoughts are about this controversial topic. See you next week. Bye-bye.